Hi everyone, good morning, thank you for coming. Thank you so much to Creative Mornings for inviting me, and I want to give Kelly a shout out even though she's not here because she's a GVSU writing alum. Thank you to Little Space for this space and everyone else who helped put it together. I don't understand how so many creative people are morning people. I am not, but I'm really happy to be here. And I'm a writer and a creative writing professor, and so my talk today will be probably from a writerly perspective, but we're going to have some conversations too. I'm really curious to know what people do, and just raise your hand if you feel like something creative is your professional identity. It's the main thing that you do. Okay, and what if it's a side gig or a freelance thing that you do? Anyone? What if it's a hobby? You're doing something else, but you like to be creative. Okay, which is everybody, right? Even if we are doing something professionally, we have other creative interests. Today's topic is corruption, and the main reason that I chose it initially was because my novel deals with it a little bit, and I thought, you know, when Kelly asked me to do this, it was just before it came out, and I thought, okay, I can talk about how I wrote it and why I wrote it and so on. But I'm actually going to talk about something quite different. But let's begin there. When we think about corruption, what do we think about? We think about embezzlement and fraud and government and politicians and banks and corporations, right? We think of money exchanging hands. We think of these large scandals. As Paul mentioned, I grew up in India, which, you know, as a developing post-colonial country, it's very common to face little petty, mundane examples and instances of corruption on a daily basis. So for instance, you have to bribe the cop to get out of a parking fine or a speeding ticket. You bribe the income tax officer to evade paying income taxes. You bribe the lawyer or the judge to get the court case to go your way. It's almost constant, and if you don't do it, you sort of get left behind, right? And you can't even survive if you don't pay those bribes. And it's a source of great frustration and resentment, of course. And very naively, some of us thought, well, if you live in a Western country, you won't have to deal with any corruption. And actually, you don't on that kind of daily level. You know, you're not having to pay 5 bribes a day just to get everything done. But of course, we still have corruption at larger levels everywhere. And as creative people or artists in one way or another, we can channel our feelings of powerlessness and frustration and anger to make something out of it, to protest corruption, right? People do it all the time. There are movies, there's music, there's beautiful art made to speak out against corruption. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I want to talk about how we as creative people are in danger of getting corrupted very often. And this is something which has actually happened to me recently, especially around and since the publication of my novel. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But first, let's look at the origin, the meaning of the word corruption. Can you all see this screen? Is there a way of turning off these lights?
We either can't see you, but we can see that.
That's better, right? I think that's better. So corruption really is, it's a noun, but I think of it as as an action performed on things, because nothing is really born corrupt, typically. When something is corrupted, it is changed, it's altered. So it's a state of alteration from pure to impure, unspoiled to spoiled, honest to dishonest, fresh to rotten. To be corrupted is to be infected, contaminated, polluted, debased, ruined. I would argue that nobody is born corrupt. If you were to see a little girl on the street, right outside, staring at a candy bar in someone's bag, and you were to go up to the child and whisper in her ear and persuade her to steal the candy bar, you would be corrupting her, right? And so it's an action performed on us, and not just on people, but on nature, on the world, on food, on computers, right? So it's an action performed by outside forces. I just want to talk about my novel a little briefly because I actually didn't even realize it was about corruption. But I've been on book tour for the past 2 months and I've been talking about it a lot and I realize that it is. So the novel is actually set in a fictional Indian city called Rishipur, which was constructed in the place of farmland. What used to be rural farming community was removed, and in its place now you have this concrete jungle because it's the symbol of modernization in India. And so you have malls and hotels and lots of luxury condos and so on. And so the first thing that's happening is the land itself is getting corrupted, right? Because when you're removing the farming communities, you're really spoiling the landscape, spoiling the wilderness. And we do that all the time. We corrupt nature with our machines, with our buildings, with our technology, right? With our pollution. So that's the first level of corruption. But then you have all these characters, it's from the point of view of 10 different characters, and you have all these characters who are residents of Rishipur, and they've come from different places. So some have come from small towns, some have come from villages, some have come from old historic cities which are not as modern or urbanized. And one character actually has come from a Midwestern college town. And she's a creative writing professor, but it's not me. And all of these characters, when they go to the city, they become corrupted in some way. And we're all familiar with this narrative and with this trope where cities are big bad cities, right? They are corrupting sites. When an innocent person from the country or from the village in movies and literature goes to a big town or a big city, famous cities like London, they tend to get corrupted. You may have noticed, right? The city is a symbol of corruption. It is a corrupting influence. And why is that? It made me think a lot. I'm a city girl, by the way. I grew up in a city of 14 million people. I love big cities, but why is that? And I was thinking about how people need to survive. Cities are expensive. Cities are hard to live in. And if everyone else around you is corrupt in some way, then you kind of need to keep up just to survive. And it becomes a survival thing. But at the end of the day, the question in my book, really, which I'm not going to spoil, is, can these characters go back to their uncorrupted selves? Because if corruption is something that is happening to you, that you were not originally born with, that means we can maybe go back to that as well, right? That it's reversible. And so that's really the question. And then I started thinking about us and our creativity. And when you think of creativity, whatever form that is, whatever medium that is, we tend to associate it with joy and love of the art or of whatever it is that you're doing. We associate it with passion. There's something very authentic when we talk about being creative. We talk about our authentic selves and our expression of that authentic self. There's something unadulterated and idealistic about it. Would you agree? Like when you think about creativity. And yet, what happens along the way? People have to pay their bills. People need validation. I mean, just because you're creative doesn't mean you don't need to be seen and heard. You need recognition. When you see other people getting that recognition that you think you deserve more, it's difficult, it's challenging. We have practical considerations. We can't just be idealistic with our creativity. And so what happens is that our creativity begins to get corrupted. And that happens in so many different ways. Who here, you don't have to answer this, but if you can, that's fine. Who here feels like their creativity has at some point of time been corrupted or been in danger of being corrupted? It can happen, and if it hasn't happened yet, then you're fortunate. But it could still happen. So I want to talk about some of the different ways in which creativity can get corrupted. And because I'm a writer, my focus when I was thinking about this, of course, was the arts, mainly. But that doesn't mean that it cannot extend to absolutely anything, whether it's gardening or cooking or a job, like even a technical job where you have to be creative. So there are many things that either threaten or tempt us to become somehow corrupt. And when I say corrupt, it isn't actually as evil or as immoral as the word sounds. It just means being spoiled, right? Because looked at that meaning earlier, it just means no longer as pure as it once was. The origin was pure and it's not as pure anymore. So we could be in it for the wrong reasons. We could be pursuing creativity, or we could be even pursuing it professionally for the wrong reasons. We could be doing it for fame, we could be doing it for glory, we could be doing it for recognition, or of course we could be doing it for money, instead of the purest, most idealistic reasons that maybe we began with. We could intentionally create poor or weak art just for commercial success, or any product. You can replace art with anything. We can become competitive or ruthless and push other people down to raise ourselves up, right? It happens all the time. We can forget where we came from. We can begin to neglect or dismiss our families, our old friends, our beginnings. We can exploit our families, our old friends, and our beginnings. We could exploit our own communities, our countries, our neighborhoods, our ethnic groups, any group that we belong to, or other people's groups that we don't belong to. I'm thinking of how people perpetuate stereotypes in their art, knowingly, right? Or unknowingly. Or how we misrepresent people of a certain group because we think that's what the audience is going to respond to. Or I'm thinking of poverty porn, for instance, right? There are so many ways of exploitation. We can create too much and too quickly without thinking of the quality, because we just want to be prolific. We can plagiarize and steal other people's ideas. We can even steal our own ideas. We can start to follow formulae and just again, because it was successful before, without being original. And we can pursue lives we don't want. We could get that degree, or we could go to medical school, nothing against medical school. Or we could go to business school, which is fine if you like it and you enjoy it and that's what you want to do. But if we did it and then we are miserable because what you really wanted to do was go to film school, then that might be a sign of some kind of corruption, right? So let me tell you a little bit about my own experience with corruption. First of all, I was writing my novel, it's called The Dream Builders, for about 5 or 6 years. I didn't have an agent. I never had a literary agent. And without a literary agent, it's really hard to get your book published because the publisher is not going to even look at your book. So it's kind of a fluke how I got it published, but that's not so important. We can do a Q&A later and you can ask me and I'll tell you. But I had no agent. I tried to write a book about 12 years ago which didn't get published. And I was getting older and it's part of my job requirement to publish as well. I was just sitting in solitude and writing this novel, which is kind of ambitious and complex. And I was plagued with self-doubt, right? Because what if it doesn't get published? I'm not going to spend another 6 years writing another novel. I already promised myself. And I had no guarantee. I had no, in fact, the chances were lower than higher. And people gave me all kinds of advice. And I'm not talking here of constructive feedback. I'm a creative writing instructor. I really believe in accepting and providing constructive feedback and making your work better. But this was advice given to me to make it easier to sell my book, easier to get an agent. And advice like, there are too many brown people in your book. Or it shouldn't all be set in India. Or it has too many perspectives. Or it's too long, you need to cut 1,000 words. Did I say 1,000? I think I meant 80,000 words. And things like that, Things that would not make my book better. It would go against what I was trying to do. But it was advice given to me to be practical. And I didn't take that advice. I took a lot of other advice, editorial suggestions, and I revised my novel 7 times before I sent it to a publisher. I showed it to people and I worked on it. But I ultimately did not make the changes that would make my novel what I didn't want to read, what I didn't want to produce. So but it was tempting, right? So there I was really in danger of somehow being corrupted in my art. And who knows what would have happened. I'll just tell you really quickly, that my publisher had a 2-day open submission period where they were like, if you don't have an agent and you have a debut novel, you can send us your first chapter. It was just 2 days and I sent it and that's how it got published. But if that hadn't happened, who knows? Would I have capitulated? I don't know. But I can tell you honestly that the temptation was there. I considered it. The second thing that happened is that my novel got published on January 10th. And since then, and even a little bit before then, I have been marketing, promoting, publicizing my book quite a lot, as I'm sure you know you have to do, right? There's a lot of self-promotion. There's a lot of social media, constantly posting things. There's asking people to read your book and so on. But there's more. There's looking at Goodreads reviews. You know, it's comparing yourself constantly with other people who are publishing books at the same time, maybe from the same country, maybe on the same themes. Constant preoccupation with sales, because they tell you that if you don't sell your first book, you'll find it difficult to publish the next one. And this constant preoccupation with how many copies is it selling? Is it enough? Should I do more? Should I post more on Instagram? And you know, I've been on book tour, as I mentioned, and in my most recent event in Seattle last week, somebody asked me, what's your origin story? How did you decide to become a writer? And a lot of people have been asking me that, and every time someone asks me that, I start to think about how far I'm in danger of moving away from that. Why I decided to become a writer, or why I wanted to become a writer, is so far away from the things that have been preoccupying me the last few months. And honestly, it's not been fun. I've stopped having fun. Because what I really want to do is read, write, you know, and think about writing. I'm happy to talk about my book. I love reading, you know, positive reviews, of course. But the preoccupation with what to me feels like the wrong things at this point have really been in danger of corrupting me as a writer. And I have had to pull myself back from it. And actually, when I was doing this talk, I realized how much this is actually meaningful for me, you know. And so I'm just sharing with you the things that have occurred to me as I've been doing some soul searching. So at this point, I would like to stop talking for a little, and I want to actually ask you all to do something, the conversation. I think we could have the light back on, probably. If you all could form groups of about 4, and then just sit among yourselves, there is that question on that slip of paper. I just want you to discuss in your group one instance when either you or someone you know, and if you don't know anyone, it could be a celebrity, it could be a story you heard, have their creativity either corrupted or in danger of being corrupted. Because what I want to know is, I really want to hear the diversity of what creativity is, you know, in your life, and also what are the various different factors that actually can cause this to happen. We don't have to talk about, did you actually do that thing, not do that thing. We don't have to go that far into the solutions and the consequences. Just what was that instance when you felt like my creativity is in danger of being corrupted? And after you discuss it among yourselves, as a group, if you could just pick one of those examples to share with the whole group, that would be amazing. So, how much time do we have to do that? Let's start with 5. People also are people pleasers. I know I am. It's something about the personality, right? And maybe we actually basically lack a ruthless streak, but we kind of try to get it somewhere along the way, and then we decide we can't after all. It's complicated. I have, my next slide is a bunch of solutions that I came up with for myself when I was doing that soul searching that I was talking about. Like, how do I go back to that place of my true creativity? But I just want to thank you all for sharing those, and I know there might be more examples, and I would love to hear after I'm done with this talk, if you have a little time. But it was just so interesting and also so gratifying to see everybody talking about it as if there are lots of examples. I know that's sad, but also the fact that we are not alone is actually very helpful to hear. And just the fact that you're all gathered here and talking about this means that there's enough people who actually care about this. And so what can we do to either resist those temptations, or if we've lost our way and gone some ways away from our original creative selves, how can we maybe return? Let's take a look. Some of it may sound cliche or predictable, but really, I feel like this is the only way, you know. So the first one is, I'm going to go back to my origin story question at the book tour. I've been asked this at several interviews, and I've been saying this sort of mechanically until I started thinking about it last week. What made you want to be a writer? When I was a kid growing up in India, I was an only child. My parents moved a lot. They kept, my dad had a transferable job. He kept moving every time I made friends. I had very few friends growing up. I was very shy, and books were my friends. I really read voraciously. I read fairy tales from all over the world. I read Russian fairy tales translated in Bengali. I read Bengali folk tales. I read narratives about girls in Western countries like Anne of Green Gables and Little Women. One of my favorite books was called The Little Brown Pepper, The Five Brown Peppers and How They Grew by Margaret Sidney. Has anyone read that? It's a great book. It was my mother's favorite book, and it became mine. I would read at the dining table. I wouldn't stop reading. I loved reading. I have never read with that much unadulterated pleasure and joy as an adult as I did when I was a kid. But that's where I fell in love with books and stories. Did I decide to be a writer when I was 7 or 8? No, because I didn't think that was a profession, right? That wasn't a possibility. When people ask me, what do you want to do? I would say I want to be an English teacher, because that's what I thought I could do. But I know that tracing it back, that's where my love of books and reading comes from, and that's why I majored in English, and that's why I kept studying English and putting off getting a job, honestly. I was in university forever. And I've only been, I've been teaching here for the past 11 years, and that's it. Before that, and I'm middle-aged. And so when people ask me and I start thinking about, I used to dream, I used to have recurring dreams about libraries, believe it or not. I know it's weird, but I would be in a library checking out books. And I've been going to a lot of bookstores lately, and it is coming back to me. The smell of books, the physical sight of books, and I was just thinking, whatever it is that you are doing, what brought you to this in the first place? It's usually not ambition, right? It's usually not what we want to make. The first thing is that you fall in love with that medium or that art form or whatever it is, that you're practicing or trying to practice or think about. Go back and listen to music. If you love theater, go to the theater. If you love art, look at art, If you haven't made time for that, try to do that without even thinking about how you are going to be creative, how you are going to make something. Before you make something, you have to enjoy that thing in itself that other people have made. And if we go back to that appreciation of that art form or that creative form, we might find that that gives us a lot of joy still, or again, you can rediscover that passion. So I'm going to move to the rediscover the passion bullet, even though it's not the next one. How many people here have, I know some have already said this, quit or considered quitting what their creative side is, at least for a while? I recently had a friend from my MFA program back in Florida in creative writing call me after I got my book deal, and I was surprised. It was like, why is he calling me? And he just wanted to talk about beginning to write again. He had stopped writing for like 15 years, and he's just started writing again. And he lives in New York. He's an elementary school teacher. He's very busy. He's a dad. But he's like, he sounded so excited and fulfilled and happy when he was talking about how he's writing. Well, I won't say happy, because he's anxious about getting published. But there was an excitement and passion in his voice when he was talking about the writing process and talking to people, finding community. I think rediscovering the passion, we say that all the time, but one of the ways to do it is talk to people who are doing the same thing. Talk to people who are struggling with the same thing, right? Find that community and go back to, in my case, if it's books, just, if I could spend a few months just reading, not worrying about what I'll produce, but just reading the kinds of books that I loved, that enjoyment comes back. Second bullet point, think about why you want to do this. Why are you doing this? If it's really for monetary gain or fame or recognition, I don't know, this talk I may not be the right person here, right, giving the talk, because you may need to speak to someone who has a business degree. Because but I think if we really think about it, the original reason why we want to do the creative thing we do is probably, like Andy said, not mercenary, or else we would be pursuing something else entirely. Because creativity is not currently the most lucrative thing to do in our society, right? But if we think about why we are actually in this, who am I as a person, which is what I've been asking myself. Am I this person who just keeps promoting myself on social media? And a part of me was cringing at that and was like, nope, that's not why you do this. So I have to somehow rediscover the reason. Enjoy the process. You know, if you do pottery, think about how the clay feels in your hands, right? Think about language. Think about the technology, the skills that you're using, the software that you're using. Think about the musical instrument that you're playing. Just try to enjoy. I tell my students this all the time. Try to enjoy the process without thinking of the product. When I was writing my novel, like I mentioned, the first draft was very difficult, but then I revised it 7 times, and each time the drafts became stronger and stronger, because I was adding mystery and adding suspense and foreshadowing and working on the dialogue and, you know, complicating a character more. And that is the real pleasure of creativity. Actually immersing yourself in the process, thinking of the skills, improving your craft. And art really doesn't have to be a means to an end. Creativity doesn't have to be a means to an end. It can be an end in itself. But the next one seems to contradict that. On my slide, that red line is actually not underlining the product, it crosses out the product. Because I wrote consider the product, and then I crossed it out because product feels so materialistic to me, so, you know, so much like a brand thing to me. But I really meant consider what you're creating. Are you going to be proud of this thing that you're creating? Even if it's something you're cooking, right? Are you going to really think, yeah, this is good, I did a good job, basically at the end of the day? Is it going to be satisfying for you? If you're writing a book, for instance, in what way is it going to add to the books out there in the world? Is it going to be original? Is it going to be something that you would love to read? You have to think about the thing that you're making, not how much money it's going to make or who it's going to make happy, but is it something that you believe in? We've done Rediscover the Passion. Be pragmatic? Well, we kind of have to be, right? Because we do need to make a living. You know, when I started out writing, I was really good at describing things and developing characters, but plot and suspense was not my strength. I had to learn how to do it because I knew I'm writing a novel for readers who are going to want to get some entertainment out of it. Promotion too, I'm learning, I have to learn. I can't just say I'm not going to do any of it. I owe it to my publisher, I owe it to my agent, right? I need to tell people I published a book so that they might want to read it if they like it, right? So you have to be pragmatic. For many of us, it might mean that the creativity cannot be the full-time thing. Maybe it's going to be a side gig. Maybe it's just going to be a hobby. That way you can take a lot of the pressure off yourself and you don't have to worry about whether it's going to pay the bills. And again, so I just want to say that it doesn't have to be a means to an end. It can be an end in itself. It can be therapeutic. It can bring you joy in your spare time. It can make your mundane work drudgery a little bit easier to bear, honestly. So whatever works for people. You know, I just want to end by this slide by saying that the world really needs us. It needs creative people. And the humanities, and I'm telling you this as a professor, a college professor, the humanities and the arts are in danger of going away. They are not valued enough by institutions, by corporations, by the government, and that is why there aren't enough opportunities. That is why there isn't enough money, and that's why we feel like we are getting corrupted. And so we can either just cave in, give up, or we can fight back. You know, we can fight back that kind of corruption. And how we do it is like this, by gathering, by talking to each other, you know, join communities, join a book club, form your own writing club. If you have kids or if you have young people in your lives, make them look at art, take them to the theater, take them to the movies, encourage them to read books. you know. Whatever we can do to practice, support, and nurture creativity in ourselves and in other people will help down the line. It's not going to be easy because it's not the most lucrative thing always, but the only way to make it more lucrative in the future is if we nurture it and protect it and trust creativity because it can save us. And I want to leave you with this quote by Kurt Vonnegut from his book, A Man Without a Country. No matter how corrupt, greedy, and heartless our government, our corporations, our media, and our religious and charitable institutions may become, the music will still be wonderful. We just have to make it, share it, and listen to it. And so thank you so much for coming and listening to me today.